Hi, everybody. Owen Callan here from Sea Castle Incorporated, looking to build on the information that we've been sharing about Microsoft Power Apps, Power Automate, the Power Platform in general, and using it to facilitate tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, my own favorite pastime as a teenager and something that's resurfaced in my life. How to generate treasure with Power Apps and Excel. Right? So here you're seeing the outcome that we'd like to produce. We have a list of different treasure types. Here I have A through Z, so you can come up with whatever labels you like for your treasure types. And I have a list of campaigns that I've been producing and working with, and then adventures that I've been writing for each of those campaigns. And then you have a list of items that would be contents within that treasure, depending upon the treasure type. And you could do this in many, many different ways. It's a really flexible tool that gives you complete freedom if you use a Canvas app when you're working with Power Apps. And so I can grab text labels and put them where I would like them to be and make the text values of those be based upon formulas, be based upon fields in databases, be based upon fields in Excel. So before I go any further, I should warn you that Excel is a terrible data source to work with. And at the same time, it is a spreadsheets, Excel. If you get stuck on a desert island, it's the only piece of software I probably would bring with me because you can do so much with it. So you can use it as a word processor. Again, you can use it as a numbers cruncher, as a spreadsheets. And you can use it as a data source that produces nice, pretty pivot tables and charts and stuff like that. And here in this example with Power Apps, we're using it as the data source for our treasure types, the values that could be part of each of the treasure types, and where we are going to store each of the treasures that we spin up. Right? So we have, again, the list of treasures in the center here. There is a bunch of labels for the different types of treasure in terms of copper, silver, electrum, so on and so forth. And there is a percent rolled column. The middle column here tells you the number of each item that might be available if you roll under the percentage chance. And then ultimately you see the third column. If I roll the dice, that looks like a pretty good mixture with 6,000 copper, 3,400 silver, and 1,400 golds. And so now I'm going to add that treasure to the list. And now as we scroll through the gallery down here, we can see the results that we just added: the 1,891 silver, the 2,492 gold, and the any 3 + 1 scroll to our treasure that's there. So that's the outcome that we're looking to produce. So let's take a quick look at how this is put together so you can understand the various different pieces. In the upper left, we have a drop-down table that produces this list here. This comes from a list of treasure types that has a table with treasure type as one of the columns. The other columns will then specify the minimum value and the maximum value for each of the line items in the treasure type. And then there is a likelihood that each gets rolled. There is a refresh button in the bottom right corner of the screen here, which I use to populate collections rather than working with tables directly. It's this button up here is a patch function, which inserts the contents of the treasure that was generated into the table of treasures. Excel We see the treasure types. We'll start there in the upper left corner where we've specified the treasure types, and we've given them the labels of A through Z here. We have 26 treasure types. If I wanted to call them different things, if I want to call them red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and so on and so forth, I can do that instead. You don't have to live with the items that I've listed here and the labels and the values. There are various different percentage values associated with the minimum and maximum percentage, the minimum and maximum values that would be associated with a proper roll saying it was there. So if you rolled under a 5% for a copper here, you would get somewhere between 1 and 10,000 copper. Notice that where there is a 0% chance of an item, there is a 0 minimum and a 0 maximum. So again, for each of the treasure items, in this case, gold, silver, electrum, and so on and so forth, ultimately we have maps or magic, and that's the full list of treasure types. Okay, so from that source information, we can generate a table inside of Power Apps, and we can spin up some random variables to see if we have met the criteria that the various treasure items are present. And then if we click over onto the Treasures tab, we see the Encountered Treasures table, which has the 6 treasures that we've spun up so far. Half a dozen of them almost are A treasure types, and then we have treasure type B and a treasure type E that have been saved. So those are the treasure tables where we get the values for the minimum, maximum, and the percentage that they may be present. So if you notice here in the gallery, I've said that the treasure is guarded by a given monster. Some of these monsters have monster 0. That's because we have not yet assigned those treasures to be associated with certain encounters or certain monsters. So first of all, I'll delete everything from the screen here so we can create everything from scratch. Now we've got a red X in our refresh button down in the lower right corner because we are missing some of the controls, like the drop down for the treasure type that we need for our treasure sack. So we're going to come back to that and fix it in a moment. So first, we're going to insert several text labels. A label for the treasure type. We need a label for the campaign. So we'll paste that. We need a label for the adventure. Then we need a label for the values to put in the treasure sack. There's a left column, there's a center column, and then there's a right-hand column. And I think that's all I need to work with for the time being. So I'm going to grab these various different labels. We'll put this over here. We're fairly close to each other. All right, so we got these 3 right here, for instance. And if you notice now, when I selected those 3 in the ribbon up top, I have an align button, and I can align them to the left, so we can put them that way. These 3 are labels 34, labels 34.1 or _1 and 34_2. So these will be 34_3 and 34_4 and 34_5. Absolutely right. Okay. So for these labels here, if you want to put their positioning in a very convenient spot, we can go to the X control for this. We can put in label 34. It was .x that we want. We want them to share the same values for X so that they line up side by side with each other. And so we'll also do this for this one down here, this third one down here. So this is going to be an X that is also going to be pinned off of label 34.x. There it is. Okay, so now those 3 are side by side, and then we want to put the Y position. We want to associate this with, again, label 34. We want this to be associated with label 34.y, but if we do that, if you notice, one's going to be on top of the other. So what we now need to do is add label 34.height. And there's the dot height. And so now that's going to pair those up side by side just perfectly. And we'll want to do the same thing here with Y for this third piece down here. Boxes next to those. So drop downs are inputs, and there are drop down choice under inputs. And I want to put those side by side with those controls, and I want to Control C, Control V to copy and paste, and then Control V to paste again. All right, so we have some boxes that are side by sides, nicely formatted with each other. This list here of treasure types, this needs to come from my table of treasure types. There it is. Okay, so after I've added the data source of treasure types, I can then use that table as the source for the items of that drop-down list. And over here for the drop-down control, you'll see that there is now the list for treasure types, and you see that the value it is bringing back by default is going to be the very last column that's listed there. Or excuse me, it's the first column actually that shows up in the table. And instead of the first column that was showing up, I want the last one with the treasure types because that's just the letter of the treasure type. Right? Now, when somebody uses this box, so if I run this for just a quick moment, you'll see that if I use this drop-down arrow, you see all of the treasure types are listed here. And when I click on that choice, I now have selected the entire row of that treasure type F. So all of those other columns that we saw in my table, in my Excel table, like the minimum number of coins, the maximum number of coins, and the percentage chance that they would be present, all of that is associated with the treasure type that I've just selected there, right? So what I have done now is I have put in the labels that I want for the text, or I've put in the values that I want for the text values in the label for the left column. And it's going to have the treasure items with the percent rolled, and then it's going to use these variable values and show those. So initially those variable values will be nothing, they'll be empty. And again, this is the language, the code, the low code, no code that goes into the text value for that text control. And then you can make the text control bigger to accommodate more line items. Where this might be helpful, for instance, is if you get multiple items in a line, like the magic items will sometimes spill over onto more than one row. All right, so we have the three text boxes side by side where I have hooked up their X values and their Y values to be dependent upon each other. So they'll automatically adjust if I decide that, for instance, this could be a little bit narrower, then the others will be resized based upon that. Doesn't need to be as wide as the others because it doesn't have the numbers. It doesn't have the associated values of how many coins. So I'm going to change the width of this to be, let's say, plus 75. There we go. To give them a little bit of background so that I can see them a little more easily, I'm going to throw in a shape. So we're going to throw in a rectangle. So there's my rectangle. And I'm just going to, manually resize it to cover everything is there. And then I'm going to change the color scheme, the color to be, I don't know, light gray. And then I'm going to move it. I'm going to right click. I'm going to reorder it to send it to the back. And when you send it to the back, any control that was behind it will now show up on the front. That's you can send it backward one layer at a time. So if I'd chosen to send it backward as opposed to send to back, it would have gone in front of one of these boxes, the text boxes or the labels actually. Um, as you notice, if I click here, I see that label here. I would have gone behind that label first, and then if I said send backward again, it would have gone under that one. And then if I said a third time, it would have gone under that one as well. So sending it to back was the same thing as sending it backwards 3 times. So I have those nicely formulated at this point. The values that I want for my campaign and my adventure, I'm going to grab from a table. I want my items. I'm going to take a look at my items here. I want the items for this not to be the drop-down sample, but I want them to come from my encounters table, for instance. That's I've got a table of encounters. So there's my encounters table. If you notice, actually in the drop-down when I was looking for encounters table, there was a column. So if I start spelling out encounters, you see that there is also this call encounters. So I could use the collection of encounters, or I can use the encounters table directly. Typically, a practice that's suggested and recommended to me is to use collections rather than use collections rather than tables directly. If you do that, however, you may have to periodically refresh the collections so that you can see that data. So I'm just going to grab encounters, and for adventure, and actually I'm just going to grab encounters. And now in the pane on the right, the properties pane, the value that I want for those encounters is not the ID, but I want the encounter campaign. And this is supposed to be the encounter campaign. And then the drop-down list here, the items for that. Items for that, again, is not the drop-down sample. The items for that, if I use the properties pane over on the right, actually, I'll show you now a drop-down list that shows me all of the tables that I have added as data sources to this app. And one of those tables, again, is the encounters table. So I want the encounters table. And in this case, it's the adventure. So I want the adventure. And now if I run this, you'll see that we have the treasure types are listed there. That's working just fine. We see that the campaigns. Now here we're seeing that there are multiple entries showing up for the campaigns. That's because there are multiple rows in that table, the encounters in table, that shows that value of the campaign. So instead of having all of those items show up so many times, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the distinct value of those. Right? Distinct means show me only the unique, and actually I need to give it what is distinct. And in this case, I want the campaign. So I want the distinct campaigns from the encounters table. So now if I run this, we'll see that we get only the 2 campaigns that are present. That's great. The QWERTY and the Atlantis. Now, meanwhile, this third piece here, we are again seeing all sorts of adventures listed here because there are multiple rows associated with each of these adventures. That some of these adventures come from different campaigns. For instance, the Druidwater adventure is not from the same campaign as the Crosswinds adventure. The Crosswinds adventure is a QWERTY campaign, right? So I need to filter this adventure here based upon the values that are available from the campaign. So the way that we'll do that, so we will need to filter this list here from the encounters based upon whatever the value is that's associated with this campaign that's here. So we will filter The source that we're going to filter is that encounters test, and the filter is we want the campaign, the encounter campaign, to match the value that is in that drop down 3_1 dot selected text dot value. And we'll close that out. All right, so you can see here if I just put my cursor right behind the lists here for the dropdown 3_1 dot selected text dot value, you'll see in the pink highlight, or the salmon, I guess, that it shows me that that value is Atlantis, which it is from that choice that's there. And so now the adventures should be filtered by that selection. So let's run this and see if that's what in fact we get. So if I, well, first let me go to my adventure list and just see. It is bringing back multiple rows still of the same adventures, but if you notice now, there are some adventures that were showing up that are not showing up. If I change this from Atlantis to QWERTY, and then if I go looking at the drop-down list here, there's the Crosswinds adventure that I knew was in that QWERTY campaign. Okay, so it's working partially, but again, we saw that there were multiple adventures listed here, so I'll click on that drop-down here. And now that I have the filter working, now I can add the distinct function. And again, I have to give it the distinct value needs to be based upon the adventure, right? There it is. Okay, so if I run this now, if I move forward with this, we see that if I click on the adventure here, we only get that one Crosswind adventure. If I go looking at Atlantis and looking at the distinct values for those, we see that we only have the 3 of Druidwater, Bishop Beatty, and the Winter Holiday. So these drop-down boxes are working perfectly. Now, if I click on the different choices for treasure types, for instance, if I click on A here, I don't see any changes in my labels here. So let's make that happen next. So the way that we're going to do that is we click on this text label here, see what the text values are that we have in place. Oops. And let's maximize that. Okay, so scrolling down. I need to use drop-down 3 as the source of this data and not drop-down treasure type like we see listed here. If I click in the dialog box to change the low-code, no-code values in the function, I can find and replace, and if I toggle that arrow there, we see that there is the 2 fields for the find and replace. So what I want to find, underscore treasure type 1, and I want to, treasure type underscore 1, and I want to replace that with these are all drop down 3, so I want to replace that with 3. And then I want to replace all is the second choice here. Replace all. Selected throughout this. So now, if I go back to run this, I grab a different treasure type. Okay, we see those numbers now showing up. So now let's go back and change it, those values for the result. Let's take a look at this third label here and look at the text values for those. And those are completely based upon variables, so we're good with that. So now let's add the roll dice button. So we need to insert button. Right. And we want this button to be our roll dice button. Okay. I'm now going to paste in a function that I saved, and then I'll review with you that function and how it works. So for this button, with the onSelect event in the function, the code that we want for that, looks like this. Right? So I've copied and pasted in the example from the prototype that I showed you to begin with. And so for that reason, you see a lot of controls in here that are valid controls that will work, like the dropdown _treasure_type_1. But as we saw a moment ago, that's not the control that works on this page. The control on this page is dropdown 3. So I'm going to replace treasure type _1 with value 3, and we're going to do that for every single one of these. All right, so did it do it? So let's do it. There we go. So now we've got dropdown 3 has got the purple highlighting, and you see the purple highlight in the background that control is indeed dropdown 3. What this big function is doing, right now you're seeing it in essentially a single line. I will apply formatting to this in a moment so that you can see it more clearly. But initially, it is generating random number between 1 and 100 for each of the line items in the treasure sack, the copper, the silver, the electrum, so on and so forth. That's then it is measuring that random value compared against the thresholds that it retrieved from the record of the treasure type. And if the percentage, if the random value that was rolled is lower than the threshold that it retrieves for the treasure type, then it sets the variable for that treasure type to be present to be true. Right? Otherwise, that variable for that treasure type is set to false. And then at the end of this big long list in the function, you see that it creates a collection. That's spelled out down here. It creates a collection called the new treasure sack collection, so the call new treasure sack, that has all of the values that we need for this treasure sack. And so now when I apply formatting to this, I say format text, you'll see it's spelled out in a much more readable format, but it is lengthy to scroll through to see it. So if you want to see it in one page, you can remove the formatting, and it should fit within one page like that. If you want to see it in a more legible format, it should look like that. Works. All right, so the only other piece that we're missing, well, two pieces at this point. We need the gallery to see things. So let's go ahead and insert the gallery. The one that I was using was a horizontal gallery. So let's look at the display, actually the layout for that. It's a horizontal gallery. And the layout for that over on the right, I grab a blank one, and we'll change the height so that it's below that, and then make the width of that as wide as we like, so we can have as many treasures as we like. Now, if I click on the right half of this horizontal gallery, you'll see that I select the gallery control in general. If I click on the left side of that, you'll notice that I only get the first item in that gallery. And so anything I add to this first item is going to be repeated for each of the rows in the table. So I want to add a text label. And it grabbed the first field for the text label to be the encounter ID. I want that to be treasure index number. I want to know which number treasure I'm working with. Now here it's just telling me a number, and that's not going to, if I run this, it's not going to be terribly helpful. You know, I can scroll through to the right of this and see, again, I've got 7 of these, but I don't know what that number 7 actually means. So I'll want to append a little bit of a header to that. And again, I only need to click on the first item there, and then in the text value for this, up front, I want to say treasure number space, and then an ampersand. And now we see treasure number 1. That's, and again, I'm going to put in a text label, insert the text label, and I'm going to change this item here to be text to the double quote to show that it's text is guarded by space quotes, and then we'll want this to be this item dot, and it's going to be a specific monster that's guarding that treasure. So I've there's a monster ID that is in this table, so that's only going to be a number, and actually I want to say the name of the monster. So let's see, monster number space. That's now again, this is showing me the number. In a subsequent video, what we'll do is we'll show you how you can use this number to look up what is the name of that monster. But again, that's for another time. So it's guarded by that monster, and then another text label that we want to put in place there. Insert a text label. Oops, just click text label. That's and this text label, make this one wider. If you want to make the width of your text box to be the automatic width of your item in the gallery, change the width then to be it is going to be the parent.template width. If you notice now, that text box is going slightly wider than I'd like it to be, because it's going the full length, or it's giving the full width of the cell that it's in, but it's indented on the left. You can see it's not quite on the edge of the cell there. So I'm going to want to take that template width, I'm going to back off. Actually, I want to back off 20 because it's indented by 10 on either side. So if it's actually, is it indented by 10 on the other side? Let's see, what is the X on this? The X on this is 40. It's indented 40. So I'm going to change that to be indented 0. All right, now something else to consider here. So again, the template width, the width on this is going to be parent width. It now could be parent template width. Now something else to consider. Right now, this is all on one line of text. If you got a big long name for that monster, it's going to take up a second row. So you want to make the height on this label to be 80 instead of 40. All right, now you've got double the height. All right, and then this last label here, you want this to be, I want that to be the campaign and adventure. That's is guarded by monster number 1. All right, and then finally, the last label that I want to put into this. Actually, I don't want this to be a text label, so let me just delete that. I want this to be something that the people looking at it can scroll. So we want this to be a text box. We're going to insert a text input, and we're going to put this down here. And we're going to make this a little bit bigger. All right. And what we're going to do on the properties for this, we're going to change the text input here on the defaults. We want this to be essentially the same values as what we have here, but we want them from the record of the treasure. So we'll grab this same information that's here. We'll copy. We'll go back to this text input in this first label here. We'll go to the default. Erase the default inputs, and we'll paste that. And so now you're seeing that those text inputs are showing up, but not quite the right way, because we want two things. We want the carriage returns to show up, and rather than the variable values that are here, we want the value from the table. So this is going to be this item, and it's going to be this item dot copper. All right, because that's the field as it's called in my table. And then here again, get rid of the variable. So this is what we need to make the carriage returns work properly, is to get rid of those open quotes and variables. And periodically, as the formatting is correct without any errors in the code, you should see the text appearing in the text boxes or the text inputs with the proper formatting. Let's get rid of the last one. No. All right. So if I run that. Okay, so I am not seeing the hard carriage returns, and I've just figured out why. I don't know if you noticed it just yet. But again, this is all showing up in one single line inside these text boxes. These are, by the way, inputs. I can type in those if I want to. So there's a couple of things that I need to address this. And then one other piece to point out to you, if you notice the scroll bar that's here is just slightly covering up those text input boxes. So I can scroll through the lists to the right, but there's a little bit of information that's being covered up on the bottom. So a couple of different things we needed to address. Number one, we need to get to the first item in that gallery. So let's make sure that we are over on the leftmost edge of that control, and now we have it. All right, so this text input, we need to make it a little bit higher than the bottom of the control, so that should now accommodate the scroll bar to allow us to go to the right. If you recall, one of the reasons why I wanted to have a text input for this was because I wanted to be able to have multiple lines. So over here in the property panel, the mode says single line. Change that to say multi-line. And now wherever you've hard coded the entry, we should see that. And by hard coded the entry, I mean if you put in a carriage return, you should see that's showing up. All right, so we've got the carriage return now working properly. And at the same time, if I run this, if you recall, they can change these values, and I don't want that. I don't want people to edit that directly in there. This right now is just meant to be a treasure generator. So let's make that text input defunct. Let's deactivate it so that you can only see it. So that's the display mode. So by default, the display mode is edit. We'll change it to view. And now when I run this, I can see that content. I can scroll through the lists if there's a bunch of stuff that grows off the bottom of the page there. But again, I can't enter values or change them. And I can scroll over to the right and I can see those. Okay, so this is looking good so far, but it's only what I already have in the table. So how now do I get the treasure piece working right? I want to be able to add it to my table. And so the way that we'll do that is we will use a patch function. So we're going to throw in a button to patch this records into our treasure table. So unselect. When we select that button, what we want to do is we want to patch. And what we want to patch is we want to patch our encounter treasures. Okay. All right, that's the source that we want to add a new record to. Now, as part of adding a new record, I'm going to take the defaults of that table. Okay. And then what's the update? So the record is going to be the defaults of a new record, and then the update that we want to give it is that new treasure sack. So we've got the collection, new treasure sack. That's got all the details that we need. And then we close that out. What doesn't it like? Oh, so with the collection here, the collection it thinks is a table, but it's a table that has one row in it. So we can fix this error here by saying, just give me the first row. There we go. All right, all is well and good with the world. So now, if this works properly, when I spin up the next treasure, we should, oops, I don't want to do that. When I spin up the next treasure, we should see it added to the list. All right, so we've got 7 that are there now. So let's see, let's go to spin up treasure Z. Let's see what we got for treasure type C. All right, we'll roll the dice. Let's give it a whole bunch. There we go. We have at least 3 different items that show up in this treasure type here. And now we're going to add treasure. We see the dots go across. They came back. And now as I look at my horizontal gallery, I see my treasure number 8 guarded by monster number 0, because again, it's not assigned to any encounter yet. It's in the Druidwater Adventure of the Talantis campaign. It has 3,709 gold, 453 platinum, and any 3 magic associated with it. So there you have it. That's how you can put together an Excel table that has various chances for different types of items to be produced as part of a reward. And you can use drop-down boxes to filter through different campaigns and adventures to associate those treasure types with. And next time, we'll show you how you can specifically look up monsters from other encounters to throw in there instead of the numbers. All right? Let me know in the comments if this has been helpful. Let me know what other types of functionality you're interested in Power Apps, either a player app to help out players with character generations and character sheets, or a Dungeon Master or a Game Host app, which is more appropriate for a treasure generation, is more for the Dungeon Masters and the Game Hosts. And good gaming.